So Pablo, we're now live, and just want to thank everyone for joining us here this afternoon. Everyone, we got a little bit of a late start here. We're about 10 minutes behind schedule. As always, when there's something live, we ended up having just a little bit of technical difficulty on our end, so sorry for that, everyone. But I am very thrilled to be here today with Pablo, and very excited for what he is going to be showing us here on our stream today. So Pablo, I just want to jump right into it with you. If you can you just go ahead and introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and specifically what you want to be showing us in today's stream.
Sure. Thanks, Wes. Like I said, really glad to be here and have this little opportunity to show some of my workflow and some of the things that I do with Substance Painter. So I'm a character and concept artist working in the film and the game industry in a variety of projects. I'm currently drowning in NDAs, but I basically run the ZBrush Guide, which is a dedicated website for resources for ZBrush specifically, but basically, I share a ton of different resources about how to create art or sharing my process and my workflow. So this fits right into what I do on a daily basis, like sharing what the process that I found useful, that worked for me, and hopefully what I share today might help you, might give you a hint or an idea of how to use this workflow. So what I have for you guys today is something that I did for the Substance source. So it's like a little demo showcasing some of the awesome parametric materials. I'm sure you guys know which ones I'm talking about. So all of these parametric materials, I use them, most of them in different ways to create the zombie character that I have here. So if you want, Wes, just let me know if that's all right. I'm going to start showing you guys a breakdown of how I set up the texturing workflow on all the layers for this particular character, and then I'll do a little demonstration of how I actually texture, like the step-by-step process, how I would approach something like this in Substance, probably in a less complicated version of this, just because of my computer might go a little bit slower. So let me know if that's
yeah, Pablo, that would actually be awesome, and I think that myself and everyone here, I can say that's probably one of the main things we'd love to see is just kind of your particular workflows, any kind of tips and tricks, just kind of get an insight into how you work. Not so much just we have Painter, what does it do button wise, but more, I think everybody's more interested in like how you create the magnificent artwork that you do.
Sure, thanks. Sure, that's what I was hoping to showcase today. So let me, I'm just going to activate a couple of things here. Just to make sure I can show you the real thing.
Yeah, sure thing. No problem at all. So it looks like you've enabled the subsurface scattering. Are you starting to use that shader more often in your work? Do you see that it's kind of helping you to just get an idea of what it looks like when you're working on skin?
Yeah, absolutely. So especially for this type of character, let me go a little bit bigger here. For this type of character that has like a lot of detail in terms of the normal maps and the surface details and the noise that I create, sometimes it tends to be a little bit sharper, and I don't like that many sharp details. So the subsurface scattering is something that I really like. So if I enable this from here, you'll see that obviously it just softens things a little bit. I don't know if it is very visible here in the stream, but
yeah, I see that.
I'll do it on and off. So all of these areas here, all of these details around the cheekbone area and the mentone and all that, as soon as I activate this, it just softens things quite a bit. And I just found it to be like a really interesting, a very nice way to visualize things within Substance Painter. It's not necessarily something that I would use during the texturing process as a reference to texture, but it's definitely something that I use to test how the texture and the albedo maps and all that look in Substance. So yeah, I really enjoy this type of effect. So I just wanted turn it on to just show you with the shadows as well, a bit of the final kind of texture that I have here. Now, a couple of things that I should mention straight away is that this guy right now is at 2K, I think. Let me just double check. Yeah, so it's at 2K. And a couple of other things that I should mention as well, just so that you guys are aware of the workflow that I use, is that for this particular character, everything is a single mesh, as in a single UV. So the head and the body is just a single mesh. And I did that for two things. I generally don't do that. I tend to split, for example, the head from the body or from the arms and things like that to get more resolution and more UV space, obviously. But for this guy, I wanted to kind of like challenge myself a little bit into work with the 8K texture. So I went for a full body, everything within a single UV. So that's why the head and the body is just in a single UV. The other thing that you might notice is that obviously this guy doesn't have any legs and it only has one hand. So the reason I did that as well is because I pretty much modeled and constructed this character for the shot. So I knew what the end result was going to be, like as in kind of like a concept art showcasing these materials. But I had a few ideas of the camera angles. So I didn't really spend time creating, two hands and legs because it wasn't going to be shown in the final image. So that's why it looks a little bit weird, not the typical character that you'll see. And another thing is I split the hand. So the hand is a separate mesh. And I use these materials and the combination of these kind of like gore and disgusting surface to kind of like mix them together. So sort of blending them a bit. So you'll see in this case, the hand is also at 2K. So you can see it has a little bit more resolution than the body. And you can tell by these little parts here. So that's kind of like the two things that I should mention. Other than that, let me just go ahead and turn off shadows and the subsurface scattering.
Yeah, Pablo, that was really good to cover that. That was one of the questions that was asked. Are you using a single UV or a UDIM? And when you mentioned the body and the head being as one, I was wondering, could you show us the 2D view as well so we could kind of see that UV layout that you have?
Sure. The UV layout is absolutely a mess. I'll show you what it is. There we go.
Okay.
I mean, it's not too bad, but it's not very well packed, if you know what I mean.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, the head and the body is just a single mesh. And the actual mesh that I'm using here in Substance Painter is a little bit higher in terms of resolution than what I usually use. So it's quite dense. I tend to work with a lower resolution, but this one, it just, it handles it pretty much pretty well. So why not? So I just use this mesh. Didn't spend too much time packing it because at the end of the day, what I wanted to get out of it is just a good resolution, and it was going to be using 8K. So I'm going to show you really quickly the final result in terms of the export of the textures and the maps that I use. And then I'm going to go back and just kind of like break down everything here so that you can see how I got to this point. The only reason I want to show you the final result is because I think in a different application is just because here, if I turn 4K, my computer might explode at the same time as I'm doing the stream. So really quickly, I have Marmoset here, and I just plugged in all the maps. Let me change the environment. All right. So this character has, this is the final set of textures, and this is at 8K, right? So you can see a lot of the details coming through really nicely from the texture. And of course, because this is a real-time character, what allows me to do is just basically screenshot whenever I find a nice angle. I don't know if this is going to make the stream a little bit slow, but just going to enhance the render a bit.
So you were basically working with 2K maps inside of Painter, and then when you did your export, you exported out at 8K.
I was working with 4K, so
Oh, okay.
I have a pretty decent computer. I have an RTX 2080, I think it is. So it just handles things pretty well. I work with 4K with no problem. But at the time of export, yeah, I exported at 8K. I could show you the 4K right now, but I'm a little bit worried that it might slow things down. Let's see if I can just.
Oh. Yeah, it's okay. You don't need to. Yeah, we don't want to take a chance of it causing problems. It'll take some time to recompute all that, but yeah, I think that's an interesting workflow, and people ask us that as well, and you can do that with Painter in the fact that you can work at a little bit of a lower resolution, just for speed or performance reasons, but then when you export, you can export and know that you're getting that actual true 8K, generated map when you come out of Painter.
Absolutely, and so one of the things that I found really useful was to have, for example, Marmoset open on the side, and that's just my personal preference. I like to test things as I go. So because you cannot visualize the 8K resolution in the viewport, sometimes when you export it, then you might have additional detail that you might not see straight away. So I just simply export it, which is a pretty straightforward process, really. Imported the texture into Marmoset and double check, for example, the normal map and the height maps were a little bit stronger. So I could just go back to Substance Painter, reduce the height values and things like that, and then just keep exporting the textures. So one thing that I could show you now, before I actually show you the breakdown of it, is something that I found really useful. I'm not super technical. As soon as I start filling with values and very specific numbers, I kind of divorce myself from the entire creative process, and that's the reason why I like Substance so much and the parametric materials, because they're basically just sliders and you can just visualize how they change. But something that I've been doing recently, which I'm kind of new to the filtering system in the shelf, is to create a filter for the skin materials or whatever materials I'm using. So I'm just going to show you that because it's really handy. And for some of you guys that know about it might seem like a pretty straightforward process, but for me it was kind of new. So if you create a new filter here with this button, you can set the path. So you can go to, I have everything set up here under the materials. So this is the filtering by path. So in my materials within the Substance Painter folder in the shelf, I created a subfolder called Skin, and this is where I put all the materials. So as soon as I have this selected, I can go ahead and create this one, subshelf. So once I have this filter, I can click on this button here, and now I have this dedicated shelf just for the skin materials that I could use in a project like this. So I still have everything else here, and I can close the filters and don't use the filters anymore. But I still have this little panel, which also you can just, put in a different screen or things like that. And I found this to be, I know it sounds too obvious, but it's a part of the workflow that I recently started to use, and I found it really useful. So there you go. That's one thing. So cool. Let's go ahead and get into the breakdown of this guy here. So I think I'm just gonna go into full screen and bring in the layers just so that you guys can see it a little bit better.
Yeah, do you find yourself, Pablo, working in this full screen mode like this?
Yeah, all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. I like to set up a few things, and then spend the time doing it in full screen mode with getting rid of all the distractions. And to be honest, there's so much things that you can do with the materials already in Substance, tweaking the sliders and changing the values and things like that. And that's something that I generally do at a very early stage. But then when I get to a point where I have the texture kind of blocked in, I go into this full screen mode and I go into manually painting the details. And that is just my personal preference, because I enjoy that process of manually placing details and painting like I would in Photoshop or any other 2D application. So that's I do enjoy this full screen mode quite a bit. So in terms of the setup of this guy, it's actually really simple once you kind of like break it down. So I start with a simple base. So this is this folder right here. This is just a fill layer with a color. I don't change many things other than, you know, the roughness and things like that. The roughness is not gonna make any impact because I do have a layer called working roughness. So if I turn this on, you'll see it kind of like overrides everything. And for me, working roughness is something that I do at different stages of the process. So I create a fill layer, and this layer, if I go to the properties, so this rough layer or this working roughness, it only has the rough channel enabled. So this allows me to, you know, test different things at different roughness values, kind of like an overall thing. So I don't have difference in the roughness. And I do this for a few reasons. So if I have this completely matte, it's going to be a little bit hard to see the volumes of this character. If I just bring, or whatever mesh I have here, right? So if I bring this a little bit closer, kind of like to the middle, then you start to see a little bit more of these details and the volumes a little bit better. And then if I want to test like very high surface details or high frequency details in the surface, that's when I push these kind of like to something like that. Because the roughness of the surface and the amount of details in the normal is what's going to give me that sort of like diffuse lighting, if you guess, or if you think about it in terms of roughness, is where it's going to be more matte, I guess. So anyway, this is just a way to say that I use this layer with this rough slider enabled just to go back and forth and test different things. So once I have that set up, let's go ahead and turn on the next one. So I start mixing up a bunch of like extremely bright colors. So the red one is extremely bright. Then I have this kind of like aqua blue. And then I use, I think this is the ambient occlusion, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, so I use the ambient occlusion as a map. Oh no, sorry, not the ambient occlusion. I just use a generator to create these kind of like crevices and blur it a little bit. Then I use another layer, which is another bright color, just a very yellowish color, and I use a similar mask. So I have this generator here, and then on top of the generator, I use a fill layer, and in the fill layer, I just put in the ambient occlusion. So if I get rid of the ambient occlusion, you'll see it just shows the effect of the texture in the generator. Just so you know. So to add the ambient occlusion, I think I have it here. There you go. So I just drag and drop one of the project textures into the grayscale image of this fill layer. So far, all I have is 3 different colors, red, blue, and yellow. And I just mix them up in the different ways using the generators. And the idea with these colors is it's something that I used to do beforehand when I was just getting started with 3D and more traditional kind of like painting 3D objects, which is kind of, I think it comes from a airbrushing technique back in the day where you paint with very bright colors, you know, the red base, then you use like a bluish tone for any hollow area on the skull, like the eyes, like this part of the mouth, maybe around the neck and things like that, and then use the yellow color to target like the bony areas, like, you know, the zygomatic arc or where the clavicle would be, and things that kind of like protrusions of the skeleton or the landmarks of the anatomy. So once you have those very bright colors, like I have here, I think I added a few more. Oh no, so yeah, after adding these three colors, then I added a new fill layer, and then I just changed the opacity of the color, and that's kind of like a flesh color that sort of blends everything together. But if you pay attention to kind of like these areas here, you'll see that there is a nice variation of color. It's slightly subtle, but you know, slightly visible, but it's there, and it helps with the base. So that's how I start with any texture really that is a character. I simplify it. I start with different fill layers, and I have another one here which is a similar color, a little bit lighter. But then I take advantage of the generator's in Substance to create to target certain areas, so like the high parts of the model. So that's the base. Pretty simple. It's just I put everything in a folder, so it's easy to organize everything. 3 colors and a couple more just to blend them or unify them a little bit. I guess that's the way that I see it. Then I have the first color pass. So I don't treat this first set of layers as a color pass. I just set it as a base layer. And in the first color pass, this is where things start to get a little bit interesting. So I have a bunch of extra, weird looking colors. And the reason I want to mention this is because this is something that I would do a little bit more subtle if I'm working on a normal character that is not a zombie. But because this zombie has rotten flesh and all that, I start to mix things up a little bit more with more contrast, I guess. So in a normal character, I will go a little bit more subtle, but in this character, I took the time to sort of do them all together and push things to the limit a bit more. So I start with another blending color just to unify everything together. So you see, as I start to stack up different layers, the effects of those very bright colors start to disappear or become even more subtle. And that is the whole point of working layer by layer. So here I'm using the ambient occlusion to add a bit of darkness to obviously the occluded areas, or these areas that are kind of sink in. Then I use another color, a slightly brighter color, to lighten up these areas. And I think this one, I actually painted it. Yeah, so this one, I simply created a black mask. And in the effects, I added a paint layer. So I manually painted these zones, like I mentioned, like the sternum, the clavicle, the acromion process, all of these landmarks of the anatomy that would be quite evident, especially in this character that's super skinny, almost like with no fat. If I turn it on and off, it's very subtle, but you'll see the difference around here. So I painted that manually with this layer. Then I started to add a couple of more outrageous colors, like this bruising blue. I think this is kind of like a blue color, and set it to multiply. And then another one using a bunch of fill layers, or a couple of fill layers and a level. So these fill layers, so the first one is using the ambient occlusion. So that's the one, I use the things like ambient occlusion, cavity maps, and thickness, those type of maps to target the areas that I want to target with a specific layer. So in this case, I use the ambient occlusion, which, hang on a second. Ambient occlusion. By the way, this is something that I'm not sure at what point was introduced, but it's absolutely fantastic. Yeah. So before you had only this set of channels, but now you have these mesh maps. I don't know at what point they were introduced. Maybe they were there for a long time and I just found them, but they're really, really good. So this is the ambient occlusion map, so I can see exactly what are the areas that I'm going to target. In this case, I want to use the dark or black parts of the mesh to apply these colors. So that's why I applied this grayscale image into this fill layer. And then I use the levels to invert it. I think it's inverted, so that obviously in Substance with a mask, everything that is white is what you can see. Everything is black is going to be occluded. So I wanted to invert that, and you can do that simply with the levels. And then I use a generator or a procedural, to add a little bit of grunge and break apart a little bit that effect. So that is basically what this whole layer is doing, and this folder called Mixers is doing. So you see, it's just mixing up the color really and adding a little bit of contrast. So it makes it look a bit more zombie-ish, yeah. Zombie-like than the previous base. And this is just kind of setting up the basis. We haven't even got started with the parametric materials and on all the good stuff. So yeah.
So Pablo, before you move on a bit more further, let's take just a moment to just answer a few of these questions that have been coming in. So
Absolutely.
yeah, we had one person here, Michael, who was just asking if you could turn off the black colors and leave the flesh color on so they can see the difference. I think it was one of the mixing colors you had. Um,
So
not sure
you mean this
exactly which
one?
layer it was. Could be. It just says to turn off the black colors and leave the flesh color on so we can see the difference.
Right. So
Yes.
I think the black colors are these, or
Okay.
like the dark colors. Maybe that's what he's referring to.
Yeah, I think
So the
so.
yeah, so the flesh color is just this base. Um, to be honest, you could just do this with, you know, probably with a smart material. Really, you can just create this simple base as a smart material and just chuck it into your library and apply it. It's just a base to generate variation in the hues more than anything. Like I said, I'm controlling the roughness from this layer here on at the top. So it's just to generate a little bit of variation in color. That's all I'm doing with that. And then after that, that's when I add this additional kind of like layer to blend everything together. And then I use the mixers or this folder that I call the mixers to push that difference between hues a little bit further. And at this point, if you pay attention to here at my properties in the layers, everything that I'm doing at this point is only in the color. I haven't touched metal, roughness, normal, anything. I haven't even started with the normals or the details. This is just focusing on the color itself and make sure that I have a good and rich albedo texture. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, actually, I think I misread that. Actually, Pablo, it was the back colors. The red, blue, and green. Looks like it was. Can you turn off the back colors and leave the flesh color on? So yeah, it wasn't the black. I'm sorry about that.
That's all right. So yeah, let me just revert that.
There you go. Yeah, sorry everybody. That was my mistake there.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So another question that someone was asking here. It looks like it was Yosef. This is the hollow on the cheeks. Was that a height map or sculpted? I'm thinking it referring to the details that you have, all of the sculpted details. So with this model, did you sculpt this in say ZBrush or something? And is that part of the geometry, or are you doing a displacement with a height map?
Most of it is just Substance. I got it to a point. I did do it in ZBrush, so I modeled the whole thing in ZBrush, but I left it at a point where every tertiary detail was going to be done in Substance. So all the web pieces of skin is all Substance, but the hollows and the kind of like the muscles of the face, that's a sculpted detail. So let me see if I can just show you quickly.
Okay,
so this is already with the...
Oh, I see it. Okay.
So this is already with the normal map applied. Let's see. All right. So I'm gonna get rid of the normal. Hopefully, it doesn't break things up too much. There we go. So this is the character with no normal, in no normal map. So you can see a little bit better of how it comes from ZBrush. So it does have, and this is like relatively low res. So it doesn't. I mean, it has kind of like the landmarks, I guess, and the basic shapes in there. So I went from primary to secondary shapes, and then I left the rest to be just like Substance Painter. Again, that I use this project as well to kind of like challenge myself and see how just to see how much I can get out of Substance in terms of the details. So I kept this relatively, relatively low. And of course, once I bake the textures, then I got all these extra details.
And so you're saying these extra details here, you actually did this in Substance Painter?
No, sorry, I think I'm confusing you. So all these details were from ZBrush.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So this type of thing, but did you see it's pretty soft. There's no surface details in terms of high frequency details or anything like that. So all of this is just the normal map that I baked from ZBrush. So yeah. So in terms of the model itself, you're right. This is the ZBrush model. I just got rid of the normal to show you how much of the details I'm actually baking into the base mesh. But this is the model that I got out of ZBrush. But if you compare this level of details that I have here, all right. So if you compare this with the final result, there's quite a bit of a difference in terms of the high frequency details you can see here. So all of these, that's what I was referring to. So all of these kind of like web patterns and rotten skin, that's all from Substance.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So hopefully that answers the question. So hopefully this also answers the question to have these different colors here. Before we move on, let me know if that's...
Oh, sure.
If there's anything else.
Yeah, let's hit one more question here that just came in. It's this one was, let's see, which generator did you use to achieve the height differences in those epidermal levels? And it says the blue, yellow, and green.
Right. So for that, I use a couple. So probably the one that I use the most, let me see. So for the blue one, I have the mask editor, which is outdated, but I use it quite a bit. So this one is quite good just for this type of things. Sometimes you can just go to the smart mask and just drag and drop a smart mask directly into the fill layer and see if that gives you something closer to what you want, and then you can start tweaking it. Otherwise, you can just use the mask editor, or another one that I use more recently, I started using is the mask builder. Well, no, not started using the more recent, but this is the one that I used to use before the mask builder. The mask builder. What am I saying? Hang on. The mask editor.
Yeah, we
so
have
this one
two.
also allows you. Yeah, so this one allows you to, control things very, very nicely with the maps that you bake in Substance. And so this is pretty much what I did, right? I just brought in a generator, start playing around with it, and see if I get closer to what I needed. But the great thing about the stacking all these effects is that you can blend them together, right? So right now I have this mask, and it's kind of like giving me something kind of interesting. But then I can go ahead and bring in a fill layer, which overrides the entire thing because it's just a grayscale image on top of all those mask modifiers or effects. And then I can just go ahead and bring in something like, let's say, the ambient occlusion, right? So you see this ambient occlusion is kind of like occluding all these areas, right? But then I can just combine these two by setting the blending mode of fill layer to multiply, right? So now I'm taking advantage of the mask or the generator here, but also the fill with the ambient occlusion. Right now it's not very evident, so I should have just inverted it. But then you can just bring in a levels and then invert it. So now you get the opposite effect here. So I'm not targeting the height parts anymore. And then because you have this effect here, the levels, you can just play around with this to tweak it. And I absolutely love this workflow because it's non-destructive, right? So you have all your layers here. If you want them, you can just turn them on and off to see what the effect is doing or what's the effect. And if you're happy with how everything is looking, you don't have to recreate it again. You can just right-click on this and save it as a smart mask, create a smart mask, and that will be saved into your shelf. And then you can just create a new layer and apply that mask, and you'll get exactly the same result, at least if it is within the same character.
Yeah, and you can use that on other texture sets or other projects as well, too.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I did for the hand, because the hand is like a separate a separate mesh or a separate UV texture set. So that's what I did. I created a bunch of custom masks to put into the hand. Now, one thing that is important to sort of like highlight with that workflow is that if you're going to create a smart mask, I would try to avoid creating any paint layers, right? Because the paint layers will be specific to the UV layout that you have on a specific mesh. So if you create a smart mask with paint layers, when you apply it to a different mesh that has a different layout or a different UV layout, then those painted details won't match. So what I would do is I would create the smart mask with these type of effects that are kind of like generators or using the project textures like the ambient occlusion or cavity map and stuff like that. And then once I drag it into the new mesh, if I need to refine things, I would do it manually with one of these effects. So hopefully that makes sense.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Cool. So yeah, so those are the generators that I use for creating these type of things. This one looks a little bit more broken down because of the procedural that I use, which is just a fill layer. Oh, sorry, not the procedural. I used a dirt generator. That's the one that I use for the yellow one. That's right. All right, so let's just move on so that I get to the fun part. This is kind of like the setup of the project. All right, so after I went through the base color, and again, if you look at the properties, it's just base color. It's not roughness or anything like that. Just concentrating on breaking apart the colors. Then the next thing is the skin details. So I used some of these materials. Let's see. So I use these type of materials like the male upper chest, the male full arm, all of these surface details to detail the body. And the way that I work on these is using mask, again, just because I find it to be a very compelling non-destructive workflow. Because if you create one of these layers, for example, the normal layers to paint in, you can paint the details and it could look fantastic, but then if you want to go back and change things, it's a little bit hard. You'll have to repaint stuff. So what I did instead is create this folder, and you'll see I have a bunch of different colors here. And if I turn it on and off, you might not see much difference. Let's see. Let's wait until it computes. I'm going to change.
Pablo,
I'm going to show you also.
Oh, I'm sorry. These materials that you're referring to here, these are the materials that you got from Substance Source. That's correct?
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct.
Yeah. So yeah, if anyone's watching and they're wondering about that, these are it's an entire series of skins and different materials and textures that we released recently. Yes, here's the blog post here that we did just a week or two ago. That's specific for monsters, characters, and things like that as well. And so Pablo, this was one of the things that we had that you were kind enough to do for us was go and test all these materials in your own projects.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there's kind of like two batches of these type of materials. These ones that I'm gonna be showing you how I use them in here. They're really good. They just for a specific part of the body. So if you have like there's a good range of different details, so you can just mix them up and you get like different looks for every character. So it's really powerful. The ones that I tested the most were the ones more specific for this zombie, which are like the cuts and the blood and the burned skin and all that, which just make it look more disgusting. But Magdalena actually tested a bit more of these, I believe, more of these other more normal skin materials, and she did like a really great, really awesome couple of characters with those. So yeah, so I use those from Substance Source, but the way that I use them, let me just show you here with the working rough or the working roughness. Let's get a little bit closer here. maybe, again, because this is not 4K, it's probably not as easy to visualize it, but you'll see a little bit of the bumpiness in here if I turn this on and off. Hopefully you can see there's slightly shift. I mean, I keep things like these very subtle, again, because I'm going to be stacking up more and more effects. So I don't want to have like something that is extremely noisy. But there is a little bit of noise in there. And this is the reason I use this working roughness, right? Because if I leave the working roughness at something like that to just paint the albedo, if I turn these skin details on and off, it's very hard to see what they're doing. But they're there, right? Whereas if I just, you know, increase the roundness, make the surface a little bit wet, then it's a little bit easier to see those details. Maybe here around the eye.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Find an area. That's really interesting, Pablo. So it's like you have to think about, you know, if you kind of think back more in traditional 3D, like before PBR, how, you know, you may have just painted, you know, a color map or a diffuse map, but now with PBR and what we're kind of showing here in Painter is that you're needing to focus across all the channels. Like you need to think, your mindset needs to be thinking more of material and not just color. Would you, is that kind of how you work? You're thinking more of, you know, all the channels working together to create all the surface attributes rather than just focusing on one map at a time?
Yeah, kind of. I'd like to like break it down in like kind of like two stages. The first stage for me is just concentrating on the color, nothing else, so that I can have a good base. It would be the same as, you know, if I do it in ZBrush or any other software, I will just concentrate on the albedo or the polypaint in ZBrush or things like that, and then move on with the rest. So I let Substance kind of like deal with the different channels, and that's kind of like a load off of my shoulders, because I can concentrate on just creating the artwork that I want to create and not worry too much about like, oh, is this channel being too rough, or is this other channel too metallic and things like that. I don't know if that makes any sense, but when I'm working on something like this, I kind of like break it down into stages. And the first stage is, all right, work on the color separately, work on a bit of roughness separately, work on a little bit of the normal as well separately. And then once I have kind of like this base layer and I start adding the more complex details and the more manually placed details, that's when I go ahead and go, all right, I'm going to add the blood, and the blood is going to have this roughness and this color, and it's obviously non-metallic and this normal, and I can paint with all the channels. And that's the beauty of it. Like you said, you can just think more about the material itself rather than focusing on individual channels. The only reason that I'm doing that and that I'm showing the separate process of the channels is so you can see how I combine them all together to get to that second stage where I use you know, the materials as materials and start blending materials rather than individual channels.
Oh,
hopefully,
okay.
hopefully that makes sense.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Sometimes
that's awesome.
like, yeah. But yeah, so the idea, if I turn this all the way up, right? This is kind of like the clown, funny version of this character. The reason I use these very bright colors as well is so that I can visualize very clearly where I'm putting the details. So in other words, I use, you know, the shoulder material or the shoulder substance to paint the details around the shoulder, or the normal details around the shoulder, and then I use a mask to only allow this area to be visible. And I did the same thing for the neck, the chest, you know, the belly area, the back, the arm, the forehead, nose, all that, right? So if I click on any of these layers, so you'll see I have, well, in this case, I have scattering as well, but I have the height map enabled, I have rough, and I have color. And I put everything within this folder so that I can just simply take the entire folder and go make sure that I in the color channel. And this is also referring back to what you just asked me before of how I think about material and different channels. And this is something else that I kind of, as I work, I think how I can remove or how can I target specific channels after I complete a task. Again, I know that doesn't make any sense right now, but basically, as I paint all these things, I know for sure that I'm not going to be, you know, using the color at all, right? I'm using the color purely to be able to place this in a way that makes sense to me and then makes sense with the materials that I'm placing. but I know for sure that I'm not going to be using the color. So I can, make sure I target that channel for the entire folder, and I reduce the color altogether. So there's none of these crazy bright colors, but I still have all the normal or the height maps coming through. And what's great about this technique as well is that I can go ahead and, let's say, for example, take, let's see, the shoulders here. It's also a good idea to name things properly. I'm a little bit lazy in that regard.
I am as well.
But let's say you take the shoulder, right? I want to take the color for the entire, and this box that you can see here is just because I'm not using the UV projection. I'm using the triplanar projection in this case. Yeah, so what I was saying is that you can take this, for example, with no color, and you can still have access to all of these layers, right? All these attributes of the material that I use, which is this male shoulder skin, right? So if you wanted to, you can go ahead and just rotate around. You'll see a little bit of the details here. If I turn it on and off, you'll see a little bit of the details. If you wanted to, you can go back to these technical parameters, and you can change the height position, the range, and so on and so forth, without having to paint everything again. And that's why I don't do it directly on a layer. I just work with mask. So ultimately, just to put it simply, I rarely paint with color in Substance Painter. I always paint black and white. So all I'm doing in Substance is painting layers with mask. So I don't know if that's kind of like the standard workflow for most of you guys, but I just tend to paint everything in mask, and that way I have control over, the height range and the position and things like that. So hopefully that makes sense of how I set up these normal details, and also that should give you an idea of how I use this working rough layer just to test, how much roughness and how much details. Here is probably a good example. If I go to something like this and turn this on and off, yeah. So that one gives you a good idea.
That's awesome.
Whereas if I just leave it as it is, it's kind of like hard to see exactly what the details are doing.
Yeah, that is such a good idea.
I don't know if there is any questions about that before I move into the more fun stuff really quickly.
Not yet, I don't think. I think we're okay. Yeah, let's just keep going. Yeah.
All right. Feel free to let me know if I'm how are we with time. I probably can do a bit longer than how long have we been? About a bit an hour, but yeah.
Yeah, we're close to an hour. I think we started about maybe 10 or 11 minutes late, so maybe we'll hit up another 10 minutes or so. I think if that's okay with you and your time.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm not in a rush today, so I cleared up my morning for you guys. So let me know if just let me know how are we with time, and I'm kind of like speed up the last few minutes. Cool.
Yeah, we'll make sure we get through everything. I'm sure everybody was like, no, we want to see the whole process. So we'll make sure we get to everything.
Cool. So the next one up is obviously starting to get a little bit into the nitty-gritty of these materials and making it a little bit, a bit more gruesome. So these layers, this set of 3 layers, the ones that I have marked as red, they kind of like the effects, right? So at this point, I'm happy with the base as a base color. Now it's all about starting to blend in all the extra effects and the skin damage and the blood and things like that. So let me just break this one down for you. These ones are actually really simple. Like these folders are really simple because I'm using these materials that I have here, which you can tweak quite a bit. So the first one is a very soft pass. Actually, I just remember I changed this one. I originally, maybe I'm not using the right file, but this layer that that I have here, you'll see these kind of like blue vessel things, these veins.
Yeah.
I originally, or at the end of this, like I said, this might not be the final file, but in the final file, I used this material. Let me just show you. This one right here, which is the micro veins. So this one is a really Oh, hang on.
And just to clarify again, Pablo, these are also all materials that you just got directly from source.
Yeah, everything that you see here, everything that I have in this material skin kind of like a shelf thingy, those are all part of this pack, which I was testing. So all of these are here. The one that I'm referring to is one of these, this one right here, the micro veins. And the blood that I'm going to be using is one of these. So you'll see all of this that I mentioned are going to be part of this release of materials. So yeah, so these micro veins is the one that I use at the end for that. But for some reason in this file, I just have it as a, which kind of works as well, I guess. But it's better to have it as a material so that you can change the parameters a little bit more. All right. So after that, I just added another layer. And oh no, this one is the skin acne scar generator. So this generator, I'm not sure. We'll have to find it. Yeah, one of these ones. It's one of the acne ones. And this is a really cool one because if I were to just create something underneath, just for the sake of showing you what it's doing, right? So this is what's happening. These kind of like fleshy bits. Those are the effects, or that's the effect of this layer of the substance material, right? So I use this one to create more variation on the color. So again, I'm still thinking in the color, but I'm starting to think ahead a little bit in terms of the height map and the difference in the normal values as well as the roughness. So there's a little bit of change in the roughness as well. So I use this one as kind of like an overall generator for the entire mesh. Let me just delete that one. So you'll see it is creating a bit more of that color variance that I'm always striving for, but it's also because this layer has metal. Well, it shouldn't have metal, but it has normal. Then I have a bit of extra details or a bit of difference between the details here. Normal. Nope. Hang on a second. There we go. It's kind of hard to see, but they started to have a little bit of difference here in the normal values compared to what I had before. So all of the difference between the layers below this one and this one are, I mean, the difference given by this material. That's what I'm trying to say. Let's go back to the material mode, right? And then after this, kind of like breaking apart of this color, then I had the first pass of the blood. So this is really cool because I just manually painted. So you see this generator has, this layer actually has a bunch of generators and paint layers that I use to target specific areas. So I can just go ahead and turn all this off so you see. So this is the type of result that I got straight from generators and using, you know, levels and a fill layer and so on and so forth. The fill layer, I think, is the ambient occlusion. Yep. So the ambient occlusion just to get started, and it's basically what I showed you before with the base layers. The levels to kind of like contrast this a little bit, and the third generator and the sharpen. So all of these four is kind of giving me the base of these areas of the blood, and then I just use the paint layers to target other areas. So all I'm doing here is just making sure that I fine-tune this mask, this black and white image, to get all these areas that I want into place. But again, because it is a non-destructive workflow, if I wanted to add more blood, all I have to do in this case is just add another paint layer and then use any brush really, just to add a bit of blood wherever I want to. Right. So, and what's great about this technique is that I have everything in separate layers, so different paint layers, so I can just invert it and then just, you know, erase parts that I'm not liking, or if I don't want blood anymore here, I can just go ahead and clear like that. Or if I want more blood, I just invert the mask. So I'm just literally painting with black and white images, right? And some of you might think, oh, you just ruined the whole thing, you just ruined this whole part, but I didn't, because I'm working with a non-destructive workflow, basically. So I can just turn it off and I still have what I have here, or I want to make it more subtle, I can just go ahead and reduce this effect a tiny bit. So there's a lot of levels of control when you're working like this, to be honest. So I really enjoy this part of the process. But ultimately, what I was going to show you is that this layer is this. Hang on, let me just make it more clear with this so that you can see more of the effect. So you see there is a lot of contrast as well now in terms of roughness. So if I go to the human blood, which is again part of this material that you can get, the human blood, this is awesome because it allows you to control a lot of the gruesomeness of this material. So the skin color is meant to be like the actual skin color. I just changed it to this one to make it a little bit more, kind of like an infected blood, if that makes sense. But you can change it to, like a darker color. And this is where the kind of like the parametric properties of this material really shine, because, everything is set up like you have created your mask where you want the material to be part of or being shown. And then you can go back and tweak the material. So if I don't want any more of this blood, kind of like drip intensity, I can reduce that. I reduce the blood accumulating intensity. So it just changed the entire look of this specific material by changing these sliders here, right? So that's how I approach this entire, like texturing of this guy. Just because I can focus on where I want to apply the material with masks and all the generators that I can use in Substance. But then once I apply the material, I can go ahead to the material properties and tweak them to fine tune them and make sure that everything sort of like feels unified and part of the same thing, which is ultimately what we all want.
Yeah, so again, you can like use the generators and things to get you like, like maybe 80% there, and then use the paint layers and to do all the manual hand painting work to finish everything off.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you if you ask me like what are the steps to get to this stage, I would say it's generators as the first pass, just to get the first pass of combining the layers. Then I would say the hand painted layers. The second step would be hand painted layers, and the third one would be the fine tune of the actual material that you apply to this mask, right? Or the one that is used by the layer itself, or the fill layer. So yeah, 3 steps: generator, hand painted, and then fine tuning the material itself. So on top of this blood, I wanted to make it a little bit more like a darker color, like almost like a more, infected and dead blood. So it's not super red. I was reading the other day. I mean, this doesn't have anything to do with it, but about the two type of blood that we have, which is the arterial blood, I think it's called, which is like super thick, super dense, and super bright red. So there's 2 type of bloods. So I was like, as I was doing this, I was like trying to figure out where the different blood will come out and things like that. So it's all part of the developing of the character, just to also research a little bit about if things make sense, really, because you can create creatures and zombies all you want, but if they're not believable in a way, then you're kind of like failing it to convince your viewer that this could be an actual thing that could exist. So I started to add these layers. So this is just a multiplied layer. You see it's just a bluish color set to multiply. That's why it just darkened everything up. And I'm using a couple of fill layers. Probably one of these is the ambient occlusion. Yep. And the curvature with the levels to target these specific areas where the crevices and dark, or the hollow parts of this model would be. So I'm just darkening that up. A single fill layer, nothing too complex here. And then a second pass, I just duplicated this layer. So it's using the same thing, but this one is a little bit more subtle. And in this layer, what I did was I changed a little bit of the effects. So I basically changed the mask, but it's essentially the same layer. And also I set the blending mode to multiply. So that is the first pass, or sort of the first sort of folder with the effects, just kind of like concentrating on this blood. Then I went ahead and did the second one. Wait until it's computed. And by the way, Wes, if there's any questions, feel free to interrupt me at any time. I'm happy to just go back and show different stuff.
Oh yeah, sure thing, man. So far so good. Nothing new's coming in yet.
So the next one up is this second visual effects, and this is kind of like where I started to use all the gruesome and disgusting materials.
This is awesome.
So yeah, so this one, as I was like playing with this, I was like, Jesus, I don't know if I should be doing this. I don't feel right. It's too disgusting. But yeah, overall, again, I'm not, I don't have much to show you in this case because it's pretty simple based on what I already showed you, and how you can tweak the materials. So for this set of passes, I started with a pass of bruises, just to make everything a little bit more dead, making the flesh looks a little bit more damaged. So it's just a color set to overlay, and then just tweaked a bit with the mask. Then here is where things start to get a bit more interesting. So for this layer, I used the burnt flesh. So I think flesh carbonized, this one right here. So it's also part of the set of materials that you can get. Let me just undo that. All right. So yeah, this one is really good, and I use a bunch of different, hand painted. Let me just turn all that off. You won't be able to see it. Hang on. I just want to show you how this material looks applied to the entire mesh. All right, there we go. So if you just basically drag and drop this into a new layer, this is how it would look like. So what I did was I created a black mask so that it kind of like get rid of the entire material. And then bit by bit, I started to paint the areas that I wanted to show where the burn skin was going to be placed. And at this point, I'm always trying to think about the final look on the camera shot. If you remember what I mentioned at the beginning of the stream, is that I created this character kind of like thinking ahead or thinking about the final shot. So everything that I sculpted was so that it would look good in the final shot. So I'm trying to do the same thing for the texture. So concentrating on this area. So at this point, this part of the mesh is not great, or it's not as well defined, I guess. So yeah, so just painting those things in there, but all of these details that come from the material. I didn't do much, to be honest. Just painting where the material should be. Doing a little bit of warp. I like to use this. This is one of my favorite filters, to be honest. I use it for a lot of different things, and I just use the warp to sort of break apart a little bit of that blending that I did with the paint below. So the paint, kind of like, I'm sure I can show you this a little bit better. Right. So I use, I think I'm not sure which one I use, which of the brushes that I use, but it's probably one of the dirt brushes that I use most of the time. So this is what I did. I painted it really rough. You see, there's not a lot of there's intentionality, but it's not a lot of control in this case. And then I use the warp to sort of like warp these edges a little bit. So that is the only reason I do that. Then I use the sharpen to sharpen those details. So you see the mask gets sharpened quite a bit, which is great. And then I use another paint layer to sort of add all of these breaks. So the first paint layer is just white, just to let through some of the details of the mask. And the second one is the black one to sort of remove them. So that's pretty much it. If I go ahead and create another one, I'll show you exactly what I did with this. Another paint layer. And let's go back to material. So one of the brushes that I love using is, let's see if I can find it. So generally speaking, when I'm doing this type of things, I have another of these custom shells with the brushes that I like.
Yeah.
But I have it as a default. So this one, Dirt 2. Right, so I have a new layer, a new paint layer. And now this is where I go into the full screen mode that we talked about earlier on. Because another thing that I should mention is I have the Control, the Shift, and the Alt keys all mapped to, I'm using a Cintiq, so I have everything mapped to my remote control, so I can just change things like, very quickly the opacity just by holding Control and clicking and right-clicking, going up and down in here like so. So that just changes the opacity, and then I can also change the size, holding Control, and then right-click and going left and down, left and right. So yeah, so in this full screen mode, all I need is to just change the size of these and start like painting. Right now I'm painting with a black mask. So if you pay attention to this area right here, I can sort of like go ahead and break through the model, or like sort of like remove some of this material. And right now I'm doing an auto save. So just gonna wait. There we go. All right, so I can go ahead and start doing these type of things manually. But you'll see, because of the type of brush that I'm using, is also not giving me like a perfect line, which I like. It's kind of like a squiggly line that feels more like, that I'm breaking apart all of this. Now, this is how I created this kind of like interesting pattern of carbonized flesh, and just mix them up with mix this layer with the material underneath. And if you prefer, this is something that you could totally do with generators as well, or you can just add a procedural material that has this type of, crackly effect, and just use one of the fill layers, one of the fill effects, and put that generator, that procedural in there. So take a procedural map that looks kind of like this crackly, this crackly effect, and then put that into the fill layer of the fill effect of the layer, and that will give you something similar to what I have here. Like I mentioned, I prefer to do everything manual in a way. I just find it really, really therapeutic. That's the part of the process of the project that I really enjoy. So doing things like UV mapping and more technical stuff, that's kind of like, all right, we have to do it. But when you get to this stage, I like to take the time and appreciate that, that sort of like creative freedom that this type of software like Substance Painter gives you, just to paint things and do a little bit of manual work. Sometimes, depending on the pipeline and depending on the pressure that you have to deliver things, you might not have the luxury to do that. But if I have the time and if I can do it, I prefer to do things manually, just because it's something that I enjoy doing. I'm just gonna invert the mask here and give you a better understanding of what I'm doing here. So all I'm doing is just painting a black with black color in the mask, right? Actually, I should just make it a little bit bigger. So I'm just adding a bit of this carbonized material. And I don't know if you guys have seen this. I'm sure you have. Like when I was a kid, there was like this toy, or it was like a little machine that you can paint with crayons with different colors, and then you just paint it with black paint, and they use kind of like a sharp metal thing to scrap off the actual paint, so it kind of like reveals the colors underneath. I don't know if that makes any sense, or you know what I'm referring to. So that's how I think about this process, right? I'm just painting with the black, kind of like the black paint, and then I'm using this brush in Substance to sort of like remove that paint and see what is underneath. Now, the difference, or the huge difference, I guess, in this case, is that this particular color that you see here, this gray burned part of the skin color, is not just a fill layer, or it's not just a single, color with a bit of information. This is the actual substance material. So what's great about this, if we pay attention to this area, is that we can go ahead and go to the actual material that I have here. So remember, I've been only painting the mask for this material. we can come back and say, you know what, I don't like this color anymore, but I already have my mask and I already know where the areas that I want to focus on are. So I can just go ahead and just change this completely to something like that, right? Which in this case doesn't make much sense, but it just illustrates the point that because it's this non-destructive workflow, it's absolutely fantastic. So I'm going to go back to something more carbonized like I had. And this is not only the only parameter that you can change. You can change a bunch of stuff as well. The amount of flesh carbonized. So we can reduce that and see more of the actual flesh like you see here. Or we can do the opposite and get more of it. And as I change this slider, the height map is actually changing, right? So it's really rewarding to work this way because you can see in real time what the effect of these materials are having on your overall design. It's really, really cool. And like I said, because it's non-destructive, if I don't like this bit that I just showed you that I was creating just to show you, I can go ahead and turn it off or delete it altogether, right? So you see, that's kind of like what I did there. Also, this is another thing that, just as a side note, it's a really good workflow if you're working on a studio or if you need to present different work in progress or stages to your creative director, or you're working with someone else and you need to present different stages of the process. You can work like this and create all of these bunch of non-destructive painted layers. And if, let's say, if I just send this to Wes, I'd say, hey, what do you think, man? And then Wes is like, you know what, there's too much of this. We need to reduce the amount of carbonized texture. For me, it's just as simple as going back and, reduce the painting or painting on top of that or add a new layer, but I don't have to recreate the entire material or recreate the entire texture. It's just a mask. And that's what I love about these materials. So
I would have said it was awesome, Pablo.
Sorry?
I said I would have said it was awesome. You don't need to do anything else.
Thanks, man. But that's just the ideal scenario, right? That's not the case every time. I'm just gonna move a little bit faster so that we can wrap it up. All right. So the next folder is just the skin cracks. Is one of these materials here, and this one is pretty subtle. I don't use much of this material except in certain areas like here and the head as well. And this one is really cool because it has a bunch of color variation, but it has a lot of depth. So you can see as I move around, it's starting to give me all these really interesting pattern here. And here for this kind of like web part, I use a generator, I think. Let me just double check. Yeah, so one of these fill layers, it has a procedural texture. I think it's this one. Ratio dirt 4. So I use that one to generate this kind of like only very little bits and pieces of this pattern. And what I wanted to do with this layer is to target areas that you could see remaining bits of the dermis of the skin. Again, all of these layers are very subtle, but as soon as you start to stack them up, you start to see the difference. And now, after this one, I don't remember what this one is. I think it's just darkening some of the areas. Not very evident. This one is using the skin mold generator. This is another one that is really powerful. But I use this one in a different way. I didn't want to actually show molds, since most of the molds would be something that you'll see in the skin if it was like a healthy skin. Well, not a healthy skin, but yeah, like a normal skin, not a zombie. So if this zombie doesn't have much of this dermis, then you won't be able to see much of these molds. So what I did with this was just use it to generate contrast of, contrast in terms of the roughness and bumpiness. You'll see here, there's a bit of more like of a dead skin or dry. If I turn this on and off, you'll see the difference. So there's a bit more of surface noise again, and difference in the roughness, as well as adding a little bit of color. And because it is a substance or a generator, I can tweak the colors here if I wanted to completely change the look of it. If you want to see exactly what one of these generators is doing, you can go ahead and create a very bright color. Hopefully that's going to show, it's going to compute. Yeah. So you'll see these areas that I'm using with this material. So let's just put it back to where it was. something like that. Cool. And the final effect would be this one. And this is kind of like an overall pass that I do to integrate everything a little bit more and make sure that it looks like a dead skin, like a zombie. So you see, I went for more like a bluish, greenish tones in there. So just changing the overall appearance a little bit more. And in here, I just used two layers. The first one is just using the human blood, but I don't remember exactly what it's targeting. I don't see. Oh, here we go. So there's some bits and pieces that I just added manually. It's not very visible. Again, once I get to this point, every new layer that I add or any new generator is very subtle. There's not a lot of change. This one is the one that I use as a blue color overlay, right? And you'll see how it changes the entire look of the character. So if you go to the albedo, turn this one on and off, you see this one is kind of like the standard one. Oh, there's not much change. But with the blue one, some of these areas are starting to look a bit more like a zombie would look like, I guess. So yeah, this is just a single layer to integrate everything else. And finally, I have this rough, and this is again, I broke it down to, like I said at the beginning, just working on the albedo, on the color, and then work on the roughness. So all of these three layers that I have here highlighted with red, they have their own roughness. So that's why you can see a big difference between the areas that have blood and the other areas, so different in roughness. But then I went through and added a bit of manual painting in terms of roughness, just to make things a bit more subtle and drying up some areas that don't have as much kind of like a wet feel to it. And after that, I used the cross generator, this one here, around the eyes. So that's the one that makes it look all disgusting here around the eyelids. And the cross generator is this one right here as well. You can get it from the Substance source as well. And on top of that, I added a couple of veins. So these ones are really subtle details, already concentrating more on the face. And then I added one more layer, which is pretty cool, just to add more details. And this layer is using the human blood, this one right here. So what I did with this one is I set it up in a way that I set up the height map in a way that I can just basically paint really deep into the skin. So you'll see these little bits and pieces here are kind of like embedded. So this is all hand painted. So there's no generator in this one. It's just all hand painted. But the generator is the one that is giving me the properties of the material, which is what I like. So the blood, and it's obviously a darker blood. Very subtle details. And then
Hey, Pablo?
Lowe's closed
up. Go really quickly through this one because it's pretty much what I showed you already. Just going through layers and just painting different colors to create this kind of like webbage. I don't know if that's a word. Just a web piece of skin. And this is kind of like what's remaining of the more healthy skin in this character. But that's pretty much it. Yeah, so that's kind of like the breakdown of this guy.
Yeah, sorry, man. One question I was trying to get back to before. It looks like PC kind of took over when I said, hey, Pablo. But we had a user was asking a question about your surface detail, and they were wondering if you could mention any brushes that you prefer. Like just a moment ago when you were talking about the skin detail that you were hand painting. Like, do you have like a set of go-to brushes that you use?
Sorry, I just cut off a little bit there. You're talking about the ones with the bright colors?
No, I'm sorry. I'll rephrase that for you. So yeah, a moment ago you were talking about the surface detail and that you were hand painting that, and so we had someone from the stream was asking if you had like a specific set of brushes that you could mention that you use. Like, do you have like? I guess my question would be, do you have like a set of kind of go-to brushes that you use when you're painting skin detail?
Right.
Oh, Pablo, did
Yeah,
I lose you?
I don't have many custom brushes when it comes to detail, this type of stuff. Sorry?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think it was
Say that
breaking up a
again?
little bit. Yeah, did I lose you? It sounded like we were breaking up a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know. You were breaking up a little bit as well, but I think yeah, I think I got most of the question anyway. I don't use a lot of like custom brushes when it comes to detail with skin. Like I said, I tend to do most of the work in the mask itself, not painting in layer. But I can show you really quickly how, for example, how I went about creating these blood details and that type of stuff. That's a really easy setup. I'll just show you quickly. I had something else here prepared. Hopefully, we'll have time to show you something really quickly. And this one I'll try to show you what that custom brush. So this is just a plane with some normals that I made in ZBrush as well, brought it into Substance. So I'm gonna bring in a material and basically show you how I would use it. So let's go ahead and use maybe the skin cracks. And I'm gonna take this layer, the fill layer, let's just wait a second. So this layer is going to be my kind of like my working roughness that I always use on top of the layers. And this layer is just again, like it says, it's just a working roughness, nothing else. Maybe this is not the best one to show you this. I'm going to go for this skin acne. Right, so this is pretty cool. Right, so in terms of roughness, I'm just going to turn it down a bit. And remember this layer on top is sort of like going on top of everything. So if I turn it off, this material actually has its own roughness and its own variation of roughness. But what's great about this is I can go back here to my material and I can just, change the sharpness of the skin, for example. And I think I'm working at 2K, so it's a little bit slow. Change the color of the skin as well. So all of these sliders here are super easy to tweak and super handy, right? And this is what allows me to control the look of it, right? The entire material. But then I want to go ahead and do things a little bit more manually. So the first thing I could do is, just to show you the process a little bit more in detail, I can take this human blood, just chuck it on top here. So now this blood is being applied to the entire area, and I can play around with for example, the accumulation. It's going to reduce that a little bit. Maybe the quantity of blood, I just want to make it really bloody. Right, so just creating this single pass alone by a series of layers, it could be done, but it will just take ages. Whereas with these materials, you can just play with the sliders, and that's pretty much it, right? Something else you can do, in this case, let's say I don't want to have the skin color. I want to make it a little bit more gruesome, like the zombie. So I can just, all these areas that you see are a little bit lighter here, we can go ahead and just make them really, really dark. Right, so that's something that you can do. At the moment, we have quite a bit of blood, so you won't be able to see much of that. But if I reduce the quantity, you should be able to see more of it. There we go, some bits. And I'm gonna make the blood color a little bit darker, just so that we can generate more contrast with the skin underneath. Right, so if I turn off my working roughness, you'll see this is the reason why I have that working roughness, because this is the roughness for this specific material, and it should be this rough if you were working with something like a liquid, like in blood. But when you're working, it's a little bit hard to see all the details and exactly what you're doing. So another thing I want to do is right now, let's turn back this on. Right now, you'll see that the blood is kind of like, it's just taking some of the details from the surface underneath, so from the skin acne. So I just go to the high map, the high channel, and change this from linear dodge to replace. So now this layer is replacing the height map or the details of this skin. So now we have like two completely separate materials, one on top of the other, right? There's no influence of this one on top of this one, because we're using roughness. All of the channels in both of these are enabled. So completely different set of materials. Now there is a couple of things. There's actually three things that I wanted to show you that you can use to hand paint these. So the first one is using the maps that you generate when you're baking inside Substance. So like ambient occlusion, curves and things like that. So you can go ahead and create a black mask on this human blood. So just click on this mask icon and go create a black mask. You can actually create a bitmap mask, and that will actually allow you to select the mask that you want. So you can go ahead and go ambient occlusion. Just click on that, and I'm not sure if it's the right ambient occlusion though, because I have a few other images. Let me just do it again. I'm just gonna create a fill layer on top, right? So this is just a fill layer. I'm gonna go to my project, ambient occlusion, drop it in there. All right, so it's using the ambient occlusion, but it's too subtle. So what I wanna do is bring levels. And again, levels. So in terms of effects, there is two things that I use a lot in Substance. So effects, levels, I use it for everything. And in terms of generators, the warp effect in the generators is the one that I use for everything. So with these levels, I'm gonna invert that, right? So now this mask is mostly black, and I can use the levels like I would in any other software like Photoshop or any other thing, just to contrast that ambient occlusion map, but I'm not actually affecting the ambient occlusion. I'm just tweaking these by layers, right? So that's one way to go about it, right? So you can just do that, and you'll see these little crevices and holes. They're having the properties of this material with the height and the roughness of that material, and so on and so forth. So if I remove my working roughness, you'll see only those areas. Right, so that's really, really cool. Just using a fill layer with one of the bake layers, so the project textures with a levels, and then you can go ahead and do this manually. Another thing that you can do, which is something new that I really find useful. So I'm going to duplicate that layer. Right, so just because I want to keep this one and show you something else, but in this case, this is the same thing, exactly the same thing. But what I'll do is I'm going to remove the mask, and instead I'm going to create a new mask using the height combination. And this is awesome because this one looks at the histogram of the channels and allows you to blend in different heights. So you can go just with the layer below, with the layer below, and use this slider to blend this like so. Or you can change this to constant, and then play around with the hardness and the contrast of this mask. Right, so something like that, right? If you wanted to do something more specific with the height map that you're getting from the layer below, that's just another way to go about it. So what I wanted to show you, and all of this is just to answer kind of like that question that fit into this workflow about how to use those brushes and hand painted the textures. So something that I would do here is I will go to the add paint effect, right? And I can just go to the brushes and select a few of those. So the one that I use for detail stuff is this is there too. I find it really, really useful because you have a lot of control. It's very sharp, but it's not perfect. So it has this alpha that creates this kind of like a wiggly, like a destroyed edge along the way. So I really enjoy that one just because of that. So if I go ahead and do this, right? So I'm just painting with a white color, but I already have the properties of my material all set up, right? So I can just go ahead and keep doing this and keep adding blood everywhere. So that's one of the brushes that I would use a lot to add this type of effect. And because I'm adding this into a single black and white image, I can all I can do, or all I have to do really in terms of refining this is just changing from black and white, right? So now I'm painting with a black color just to refine those edges. So this is probably the one that I would use most of the time for these kind of details. I also use the mold or the dirt mold. Is it called mold? Yeah, mold, this one. So this one is also really cool. Maybe not for this blood material, but it just creates all of these spots that have different values. And it makes it like really, it's almost like if you're doing something, if you're familiar with traditional painting, it's kind of like with a sponge, just adding details. So that's really, really handy. But not only that, you can also create your own custom brushes to paint skin details. So if you wanted to be a little bit more precise, let's say to paint kind of like wrinkles around an area, chest or the neck or whatever it is, you can actually take one of the Substance materials from the Substance source and turn that into a tool in Substance Painter. So I'm just gonna, just for the sake of demonstration, I'll do that really quickly. So I'm gonna start with this layer here, turn my working roughness to something like that. And then on top of this one, I'm gonna create a paint layer, right? So these layers are the ones that I don't use as often because again, anything that you paint on this layer is kind of like set in stone. Like you'll have to erase or paint back again on top. You don't have that ability to fine tune the material once you paint it, if that makes any sense. Like whatever you paint, that's it. So I have a brush here in my tools. For example, this elbow wrinkle. When I paint with this, it's actually painting like the elbow wrinkles of the surface, but it's also following the, I don't know if you guys can see it. I don't know if this is the best color for it. I'm going to change the roughness. All right, so that one should be a little bit easier to see. All right, so if I want to paint these details, I'll just go with this brush, and it's like a soft brush with a soft alpha, and I'll just paint this. But the wrinkles are kind of like following the flow of my brush. So if I wanted to, let's go ahead and go this way, you'll see the wrinkles are kind of like the opposite direction, right? So I can use opacity in this brush to sort of blend this as well, and very quickly, using a very powerful substance source material, create these wrinkle details very quickly just by painting. So the way that you create a brush like this, I'm just going to show you really quickly because it's extremely easy. It's like so. So all you have to do is, let's go to the brushes, and I'm going to select something like this basic soft, right? So this is just a simple brush, and this is what it's doing. Unmatch. Right now I have this material. Let me just get rid of that. So if you haven't set it up, this is kind of like the result that you'll get, right? But let's say that you want to create a brush that paints, I don't know, that paints, let's say the micro veins, for example. All we have to do is, in this brush, you can go to the micro veins and drag this material into this material mode. So that will turn your brush as kind of like a material brush. So click and drag it and drop it in there. So now Substance is using this material as part of your brush. If I increase my size, now I'm painting with the material, right? So in this case, it's not necessarily following, or is it? Let me check. Yeah, it's not following. It's not following kind of like the direction or the angle of my brush strokes. But as you can see, I'm painting with the entire material. So you can just, maybe this one is not the best. I'm just going to show you another one just because it's so easy to set up. I'll use maybe the skin molds. Right? So now every time that I paint, I'm actually painting this skin mold material. Ooh, maybe this one is too big. or too complex for this. I shouldn't. All right. So something you can do here in the brush as well is to change this follow path, and that's what I did for the wrinkles that I show you. Turn that on, and that way Substance is gonna follow the kind of like the flow of your brush. Probably this is not necessarily the kind of like the effect that you want, so you can go ahead and tweak this, just changing the spacing of it a little bit. Yeah, this is a little bit. This material is a little bit big, or like a little bit heavy. Sorry. To be able to use it in this context, I might as well change that. Let's just leave it as a micro vein for the time being. Yeah. So the last thing I want to show you with this setup of your custom brush is that you can use an alpha. So right now you have a preview of a very soft alpha, but we can go to the alphas. And you can use anything. You can create your own custom alpha. Let's take this sponge and just drop it there, right? So you see the effect that this has straight away. So that's creating a variation in details as well, but it's using the actual material, the substance material mode, to create those details. Just gonna give it a few seconds because it's doing an auto save as well. Done. But like I said, you cannot control this once you put it in there. Once you're happy with your brush, let's say that this is something that you like, maybe some angle jitter as well to variate the rotation of this as well, and maybe change the flow to have pen pressure. That way, I'm gonna create another layer. It's getting a little bit messy. That way, depending on how much you actually press on your if you have a tablet, you can change the size and the intensity. So this is kind of like a nice molding technique to add variation. The only thing, like I said, is this is kind of like set in stone. If you want to change the material before you apply it, you go to, let's say, I want to make it very obvious, change the colors to something ridiculous so you can see the effect a bit more. So you're painting with this effect, but you cannot change it. So now that you're happy with this brush, you can just right click here in this brush. That's how I do it. And you can create a tool preset. So if you create a tool preset, here is your new brush under the tools. So whenever you swap to these different tools, it will keep all your settings plus the material that you use. So I can come back to my elbow wrinkle and do the wrinkles that I use. So this is one of the custom brushes that I created using one of the Substance skin material, sorry. And then this is the one that we just created. So if I click here, you'll see we have these settings that we set up, and we can just keep painting. So hopefully that answers that question. It's a long-winded rant on how I use the brushes, but yeah. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how I go about it.
No, that was awesome, Pablo. That was great to explain it the way you did, and to kind of go into that depth of how you're using the tool set, how you're using the brushes and stuff. I'm sure everyone's very appreciative over that.
No worries. I'm glad that that I could help, or I could shed a light into my own workflow as well. So hopefully help some of the folks there just to maybe explore a different avenue than just using the usual smart materials and predefined settings a little bit more. I don't know if there is any other questions that you want that lying there. I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, we can wrap it up. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we can go ahead and wrap it up. There wasn't any other question that was very specific to what you're showing here with the zombie. So yeah, I think we're pretty good, Pablo, for that. Let's see. I will actually, I do have a question for you. It's actually coming from myself, actually.
Brilliant.
So yeah. I tell you, I like to ask this question because just from myself, when I go to start a project. It could be anything, whether it's I'm painting or working on a material, I'm trying to model something, whatever. I always find it difficult to actually start. Like I'll find myself starting the project and then getting frustrated and throwing it away, and starting over and over and over. And I was just curious, just on for yourself, like this zombie project or any project you're working on, like how do you get yourself started? Do you find that it's difficult to start something, or maybe it's just me, it's easy for you? I don't know. I just like, how do you start something?
No, I completely I identify myself with that question as well, because that's something that happens to me all the time, like in every project. Some projects I might start like faster, just because I have the pressure that I have to finish them sooner. But I always have the same problem. I always go like, I don't know what to do first, or I think what to create to motivate me to continue the project. And I think there's a few different things that will play a part in terms of the longevity of the project, or how long that enthusiasm and that that feeling of you wanted to get it done will last. So a few things that I do first before I get started is to find a bunch of reference that I actually like and a bunch of reference that are actually useful. So I set them in like two different sort of screens, or two different. I use Pure Ref. I'm sure you've heard of it. So I created two sets of text of references. So I create a bunch of references that I find like inspiring, or that I find I would love my project to look something like that, or to have this kind of feeling or this mood, create a kind of like a mood board of what I want to aim for. And then the second thing that I do is create a bunch of references that are actually useful. So, anatomic references, for this skin, this character, I didn't do much research because I just find it a bit disturbing. So in terms of finding references for this zombie of like burn people or stuff like that, instead of doing that, what I did was just learn a little bit more of the skin itself, like the different layers of the skin, and that kind of like motivates this particular project. So I'm just giving you very specific examples for this one, because you can see like in terms of you can relate to it a little bit better, I guess, if I have it here on screen. But so yeah, those research, or that research part is what helps me to decide, all right, this has legs, this is a project that I would like to work for a long time, or I don't mind working for a long time. But then it comes to this, you get to this point where you start and you're all fired up. It's like, yeah, this is going to be great. And then it gets to a point that myself, I feel stuck in a point that I said, well, maybe I should have started in another way, or maybe I should have approached it in a different way. But if you push yourself like through that little gap, that little obstacles stage, everything is going to start coming together. So if we go to a more practical example again with this character, if I go to this point, right, and I get to this point and I said, all right, well, yeah, it looks like a kind of like a zombie because of the model, and the textures are all right, but it doesn't make me want to wake up and work on this character just yet, right? But that's just like something that happens with every project. I find with every project that I do, it's just the same thing. But then I started like, layering things bit by bit. And I know this is very specific to Substance Painter, but I do the same thing in ZBrush or Photoshop, whatever else I use. It's just push through and keep going on, like adding bit by bit layers, or adding, research and tweak things along the way. So I think to more specifically answer your question about what motivates me, or what makes me keep working on a project is to hold myself accountable in a way. So what I mean by that is, if I have a project that has a deadline, that is the deadline that I have to deliver the project, for example, or for the client. But I myself set a different deadline with a bunch of different milestones that have nothing to do with the client, but just for myself, so that I can find this project, interesting and challenging. Because if it's something that I would do, like very nowadays, something that I found very easy to do, it's not as motivating for me as something that I need to figure out, or things that I go, oh, how am I going to show this? How am I going to get to this point? So I try to maintain these milestones. And to give you an idea of those milestones, is with, for example, this character, I would say, all right, by this day, I want to have the entire body ready, and I want to be 100% happy with how it looks, right? And the deliverable date could be 3 weeks or 4 weeks away, but for myself, I set that deadline, so I don't procrastinate. I go like, all right, I need to hit that point, and if I get to that point and things are looking good, I can progress. If I don't meet that self-imposed deadline, it's like, all right, the pressure is on. I need to focus on this, get it right. And And those kind of like self challenges that I impose to myself sometimes get me a little bit stressed out, but those are the ones that sort of like push me to maintain kind of like that level of energy throughout the entire project. I don't know if maybe that's a little bit too abstract. It's a hard question that I'm not sure. Like depending on different circumstances, might be a little bit different. For example, I'm very fortunate that my partner, she's very supportive of what I do. So she understands that sometimes I'm like in the zone, and it could be like 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm just still working on something specifically. But it might not be the case for everyone else. You might have kids, or you might have like a very restrictive schedule, or you're working this as a hobby, not as a work, or whatever it is. So what works for me might be completely different for what from what it works for you, right, or someone else. So I think if you want to find that kind of like balance, that middle ground, it's about finding something that is inspirational within a project that might not be. That's even more abstract. What I'm trying to say here is, let's say that you get this project of a zombie. You're not really into zombies, but it's kind of like a job that you have to do. I'm not saying that this is the case for this project, but if you have to do something like that, find something that inspires you within that project. So I'm just gonna pick up something from this. Let's say I want to learn more about the human anatomy, for instance, right? I want to polish my human anatomy skills. So I'm going to take advantage of this project, which is going to be a zombie, and ultimately it's kind of like a humanoid character or human character, and explore that anatomy and explore that. So I use this as a challenge to myself to study anatomy as I go through the motions of creating the project. So again, it's super conceptual and abstract. I don't know if it makes sense, but it's just trying to find something that inspires you with something that might not be as inspiring. But if you find some project that is like as awesome, like for me, as working on something like this, then you're in a pretty safe place, I guess. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that's awesome, man. Thank you very much. It's actually very inspiring. So yeah, thank you very much for taking time to answer that question. All right, so we can go ahead and wrap up. So one last thing is they would like me to ask you to show the final render one more time. So if you could, I think that was through your Marmoset project. And while you are
sure.
opening that, I also want to remind everyone else that we are going to have another live stream this Thursday. I believe it's going to be the same time, so it's 4 p.m. Pacific Standard, I think. But again, that's this Thursday, and we're going to have Magdalena. She's going to be with us, and she's going to be doing something similar, except it's going to be texturing a character. So she's going to be using Substance Painter. And my coworker Marine is going to post in the chat here the actual address to the blog. So again, it's just going to be through our YouTube channel again. So yeah, we finally got a crash there, huh? It was at the end of the stream.
Oh no, I just clicked the two. I try to close the two because I had two running. That's probably one of the problems there.
Oh, it's no problem.
Two projects at the same time.
Yeah. So everyone listening, so Marine just posted the link there. You can also just, if you subscribe to our Twitter account, just always be following us. We do like a post about the upcoming live streams. Also follow us on our Discord channel. We also post a lot about the live streams as well. And again, you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, and there'll be information on the stream there as well too. Yeah, this is magnificent, man. It just looks so incredible.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah, so this is the final bit. Obviously, it has all the textures are from Substance. Just using Marmoset to put it all together because it's just easy. And the lighting is just it's another part of the process. Like I mentioned, when during the texturing process, the manual placing of the details is what I really enjoy during that specific part of the process. But at this stage, I spend a lot of time just finding the right lighting and the shading just to communicate. That light ultimately is what communicates what we see. So it's I spend a lot of time here. And I guess going back to again, like I said, I sometimes just mumble and branch out to different topics. But going back to the question that you posed about what kind of like inspired you, or how do you maintain your level of energy throughout the project, this is something that I do very early, at a very early stage of the process. I do a quick sketch, a quick mock-up, and I use Keyshot or any other software to render. Like Marmoset in this case is really easy because it allows me just to throw something really quickly. It could be just polypaint from ZBrush, and visualize and have an idea of, all right, this is going to look okay for now, but I'm going to make sure I'm going to make it look really, really cool once I go through the entire process. So that's kind of like what I do early in the process. Like more specifically to answer your question in terms of something practical that you could do is just basically that, just prototyping. So you do something really quickly, put it together, see if it looks good, and if it looks all right at a prototype stage, then you can for sure know that once you spend the time and develop the look and feel of the character a little bit more, it's going to be, way better. So yeah, so that's the final character at the end. I'm missing a few things actually. So I just do a bunch of different lighting scenarios to see what showcase the character better, what light is better. So this one is kind of like, I think, the one that I use for the final image, but I kind of like this one too. It's a more dramatic effect that goes with the mood of the character. But I just want to show you something quickly. I don't know if I have it here actually, because with this, oh no, it's here. Right. So this is kind of like the final set of images. After I finished with the zombie, I thought, let's just make something else to make it a bit more interesting. In terms of like the concept of what it is, because just presenting a zombie for the sake of, this is a zombie, it's a little bit generic in a sense, especially because, the features of a zombie, they're not other than having a rotten flesh and look disgusting in a way. So I just went ahead and did this kind of like caterpillars and the butterflies, and just kind of like thinking. To be honest, when I was doing this, I was listening to I don't know if you're familiar with the Ricky Gervais shows, the Carl Pilkington. It's a British comic. Anyway, he says something about like from death come beauty or something like that. It's just a funny thing. So I just it kind of like gave me this idea of like, all right, I can make something that, from this rotten flesh, all these caterpillars are eating away, and then from this, come life and lives move on, or something like that, just to make it look a little bit more meaningful than what it actually is. But that's about it. And yeah, I know that the caterpillars, the actual this type of caterpillar is not the one that matches this monarch. The monarch caterpillar I think is all green. But, I like the pattern of these ones and the contrast that generates with the rest of the model. So that's why I went for this one. If you're very particular and very, particular and picking up things that are wrong with this model, I would say that's one of those, that the caterpillars are not the same. These monarchs won't come from the caterpillar. But anyway, that's it. That's the final character. It moved. This is in real time, and it just works really well. These are all 8K textures, so pretty detailed stuff from Substance.
Absolutely amazing, man. It looks incredible.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's about it. That's all I have.
Well, Pablo, thank you so much again for taking your own time out to do this stream for us. It was awesome. I really enjoyed. It was an honor for me to be able to sit with you and just have you go through your project like this. And I know everyone else in the live stream was very, very thankful as well. So that's awesome, man. Thank you so much. And also thank you to everyone who, has been following along with us and checking out the live stream. Again, I'm sorry, everybody, for the little technical glitches that we had at the beginning. We'll get those ironed out for next time. But again, Pablo, thank you so much. And I look forward to having you back on for another live stream in the future.
Absolutely, no worries. Thank you so much for having me. And again, thanks for everyone to tune in. It was really, really fun as well for me. I really enjoy this type of like casual casual streams as well.
Yeah, very good. Well, thank you, Pablo, and thank you, everyone. We will see you next time.
All right, cheers, everybody. Thanks.